Oh, hey there. Welcome back. Fancy seeing you here. What are the odds? Let's continue on with part 2 of my Greenfield village tour. This is the Ackley covered bridge. It was built way back in 1832 in southwestern Pennsylvania. It crossed the Wheeling Creek. These covered bridges protected the wooden trusses. When the trusses were exposed to the sun and the wind and the rain, their life expectancy was only about 10 years. But a roof covering them increased the life expectancy to about 100 years before they would need to be replaced. In the late 1800s, iron bridges began to replace wooden bridges. Henry Ford acquired this bridge in 1937 when it was scheduled to be torn down. So thanks to Mr. Ford, it is another piece of American history preserved. Oh, and this might not be what it was built for, but this roof is also currently keeping me dry from the rain. But not for long. Thankfully, though, the sun is trying to burn away those clouds. In my first Greenfield Village video, part 1, I showed Thomas Edison's laboratories. Here, you see his grandparents' home, which was built in 1816 in Vienna, Ontario, Canada. As a boy, Thomas enjoyed coming here and visiting his grandparents. So Henry Ford also preserved this house and brought it to Greenfield Village. As I go into the house, I will let the woman dressed in period attire explain more. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you today?
Great.
Good. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
You are in the Edison homestead. We call it the Edison homestead because it is originally built by Thomas Edison's grandfather in Vienna, Ontario. Originally it was constructed in 1816, and that was the first half of the house, along with the formal parlor on the left and the bedchambers upstairs. This section of the house, is along with the kitchen bedroom, was erected in 1860 as an addition to the property. But we like to fast forward even farther than that. So this house is all about time jumps. And you're seeing 99 years after the fact. And at that time, Thomas Edison's cousin lived in the house. And we like to jump to 99 years after the first build in 1915 to show you how technology really impacted the space of an everyday house. So in the front room, you're going to notice we have some pieces of technology, including our phonograph in the corner, so that allows us to have music in this time period. And we don't have to pay someone to come play an instrument, or we have to know ourselves. We can actually have recording sounds on our records. We also have our Singer sewing machine, which provides us with an opportunity to create more outfits for ourselves, right? And speed up the process of hand sewing, right? We also have paper tablecloths, paper napkins, other decor items are things that you can get ordered and delivered to your house. So you're starting to see in that turn of the century that people are becoming more consumers instead of being sole producers. So that's kind of a nice shift.
Yeah.
Now today, I don't have to spend all day cooking and cleaning in here because I actually have time-saving devices for me. So here at the house, we like to showcase one dish that they make, and then we like to show you how other people spent their time in 1915. So we have our refrigerator right behind you. That is a working artifact there. And in 1915, this is very energy efficient because you're not plugging it in. It's not an electric refrigerator. This is actually being powered with ice, so it's a glorified cooler in 1915. So the top compartment holds the ice, and since cold air sinks, it cools and chills the bottom chamber. Now later on in the 30s, when the electric refrigerator becomes invented, you see this one take on a new name, and that's when we start calling it the ice box or an ice chest. Because we have to say this one uses ice, this one uses electricity. And so we actually did a lot of cooking, and we don't have to spend all day cooking because we can batch cook throughout the week. And today that's exactly what we did. So we have a little picnic items here ready for decor and ready for our adventure. So a couple items that are left over from our picnic include our delicious corn fritters that we did this week. And this recipe was from the Crisco cookbook because of course we need to market and make sure that we're selling items based on what we have. And in 1915, other companies like Crisco, Gold Medal Flour, they're designing cookbooks because they know women are doing most of the purchases. So they say, oh, let's make a cookbook. And then, of course, everything has to use Crisco because it's a Crisco cookbook. So I'm going to make more money. We also have Oreos because, believe it or not, Oreos were invented in 1912. And so having Oreos and Nabisco, that was a readily treat that we could order. And we can order through our general store or even our grocer. And we even have our Eastman Kodak pocket camera, so we can document our trips. Now what I'm currently doing is I'm doing a little bit of recreation, which what was really popular was watercolors at this time. So you can order these through companies like Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward. And I'm just using our beautiful 1906 Nature Journal of a famous scientist, and she kind of documented the different items that she saw on her journey. So I'm using this as a little bit of an inspiration and trying to recreate it. And I haven't watercolored in a very long time, so I'm trying to get the dust off a little bit. But it's not too shabby. But if you're really into recreation in this time period, definitely take a look across the street. We have our park ranger out there, and you start seeing a big shift of our automobile outings, and going to places like national parks start to take off in the early 1900s. So definitely take a look. I know Abby's over there, that's the horse. And Abby, she was a little spicy today because she got new shoes. So that meant her lunch came later than it normally does.
She wasn't having that.
No, she was not. She was a little hangry. But now she's happy because she had her hay. So definitely say hi to Abby.
This is the Giddings family home. John Giddings was a shipping merchant in the West Indies during the second half of the 1700s. He frequently sailed from his New Hampshire home to the West Indies. He built this house in 1751 and lived in it with his wife and 5 children. It was located in Exeter, New Hampshire. He was affected by the British trade regulations of the 1760s and 1770s, and his family life was greatly impacted by the Revolutionary War with the British.
That heated the rooms and provided a heat source for cooking in the kitchen. The hall, or keeping room, on your left, was designed to accommodate the informal daily activities of the family. It contains a number of furnishings in the Queen Anne style, popular during the mid-1700s. On your right is the parlor, or best room, which was used for entertaining and other special occasions. This room is currently occupied by the family of John Giddings, a prosperous merchant and trader. A bustling commercial village, Exeter became the capital of New Hampshire in 1775 and was a center of military and political activity during the Revolutionary War.
Moving on to the next house now. I'm coming up to the Susquehanna plantation. Henry Carroll owned this house, which sat on his plantation in St. Mary's County, Maryland. It was built between 1826 and 1836. By the time the American Civil War broke out in 1860, the Carrolls owned 75 slaves.
More free African Americans, very high percentage, the highest percentage in the nation of free African Americans in the country in Maryland. Farming, and then we were talking at lunch about the butter.
On the left
and
here is the
a lot
well,
of other outbuildings they would have had.
and this is the dairy. Wow, really cool.
The enslaved would have had their huts, their homes near the rivers and where they worked on the 500 acres that they have under cultivation at this time. So
Like at the end of the fields, kind of.
yeah. So they wouldn't have to travel from here to the fields.
One thing's for sure, people were shorter as well. I would, this doorway is gonna come right about to my eye level or so. So I gotta duck down here. Yeah. Definitely a little bit short for me. That's really amazing though. Here comes the bus. There's the bus stop. Nobody there, so we did not stop. Look at this. Cotswold cottage. Where does that ever go?
This is 1931 AA bus. It first served as a city bus in Florida, then as a shuttle bus for a tourist business in Tennessee, and we've had the bus since 1985.
That is so cool.
It's called AA because of the size of the chassis and axle, but it's the same 40 horsepower motor that's in the Model A cars.
Wow. Thank you. That's a great piece. So these old early 1930s buses drive around the village and stop at different bus stops, much like in a small city. Now this house with a lot of character is the oldest in Greenfield village. This is Cotswold Cottage, from the Cotswold Hills in southwest England. It was built in the early 1600s. Nearly all of the structures in Greenfield village come from America, as it's kind of a living history of America museum. But there are a couple buildings from England, since that really is a part of the American story as well, since Henry Ford and many other Americans can trace their ancestry back there. As for Cotswold, Mr. and Mrs. Ford were fond of the distinct character of the buildings in Cotswold. So, he bought this house and had it moved here to Dearborn, Michigan. It's a quite beautiful cottage, isn't it? For hundreds of years, generations of farmers and stonemasons lived in this house. But by the 1900s, more people were living in cities, and they bought cottages like this as a getaway from the fast-paced city life. And again, another short doorway there. Bonk. I would say if you're over 6 foot, you're gonna bonk your head around here.
Absolutely incredible place.
They also serve English tea with English-inspired pastries daily here at Cotswold Cottage. Now we're coming up on what they call Cotswold Forge. It's actually not from the same place, but it is also from southwest England, not far away. And it was also built in the early 1600s. Many generations of the Stanley family worked as blacksmiths in this shop for hundreds of years. The last of them was Charles Stanley, who died in 1909. As the world became more and more industrialized, blacksmithing became more obsolete.
You've not only just stepped back in time about 100 years, but have also stepped several thousand miles from Dearborn, Michigan. This blacksmith shop was originally built in the village of Snows Hill in Gloucestershire, England. It was owned and operated by the Stanley family. They've been in business there as blacksmiths for at least 300 years. The shop is outfitted to appear as it would have been in the late 1800s.
And again, Henry Ford believed those buildings also told the American story, as that is where their ancestors were from. Now I'm coming up to the Daggett farmhouse. Samuel Daggett was not only a farmer, but built houses and furniture as well. This house was built in 1754 in northeastern Connecticut. Like most families in Connecticut in the 1760s, they were self-sufficient and survived off of their own farming and building skills through hard work. They grew crops and raised animals for food and for work.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
All right, how are you?
Great. Sorry to interrupt your meal there.
That's part of your ticket price.
Samuel would also build things, while his wife Anna cooked, cleaned, tended to the garden, and fed the animals. Here at Greenfield Village, presenters live as the Daggett family did in the 1760s. They grow crops on the farm and make their own food, using means and tools available at the time, and making food that would have been made at the time.
In the pea soup, because we believe that is.
What's pea soup another way?
Pea soup another way is not my grandmother's pea soup. It's a lighter pea soup. It has more broth. Generally, it has a lot of leafy greens in it, but our garden is not producing leafy greens right now, so it has some onion in it. But it's a lighter pea soup. I don't know. When my grandmother made pea soup, you could stick a fork in it and the fork would stand.
Yeah.
This is not that pea soup.
That is quite a tool you're using over there too. That was
The knives?
yeah, that's impressive.
Well, oh, I lost my fork. Oh, it's
in the pickle.
The
jar.
Oh, look
forks,
at that.
the
Yeah.
forks are a little more dangerous than the knives.
Yeah, those look like murdering utensils, not eating utensils. That's
They're a little sharp. Our knives, they have a dull edge on this side, nice and flat. This is your sharp side. But you scoop the food onto the knife, and that's how you eat it. People had knives. They were a useful tool. You can cut things, you can eat off of them. That has changed in modern times. We don't quite use knives for as much as they were used for in 1760, but in this period, they're a very useful tool, and
yeah, interesting.
it's gonna work better than your fork if you're trying to get something
I
into
could
your
see
mouth.
That fork, yeah. That's
Oh my God, you got the fireplace on?
Well, how do you think we cooked?
How do you think we cooked it?
It's a little chilly in here.
It is.
The reason they found that humorous is because it's summertime, and it's definitely not chilly.
So quick, Victoria swept it away.
Yeah, usually.
So they make their own food, growing in a garden, and they cook it in that fireplace here. tend to the garden themselves. That's really cool. Eat the foods from the 1760s. By right there. There's all their firewood all stacked up. See off in the distance, there's a big ford in the side of the hill behind there. Farris windmill, thought to be the oldest surviving windmill in America. Pretty awesome.
Farris windmill was built in 1633 on the north side of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The arms were propelled by the wind, and when they turned, they operated the grain milling machinery inside. Coming up now on the Plympton family home. The original house dates back to 1640, belonging to Thomas Plympton. Thomas Plympton was one of the original founding fathers of the Puritan settlement of Sudbury, Massachusetts. Having come from England, he was killed by the Indians in 1676. The original house he built burned down in the early 1700s, and the Plymptons living there at the time rebuilt the house around the original chimney. There is still a brick in the chimney, dated 1640.
I will not allow my children to so address their elders. Thou wilt treat thy parents with respect as thou hast been taught.
Aye, father. I beg thy pardon for my forwardness.
Ah, there you be, lass.
You are forgiven, daughter.
We'll talk of market this eventide, wife. Thou art right, my dear. 'Tis well that our elders should have some better clothing if we will be a suitor. But mind you, Thomas, I've not given my blessing on any such match.
Well, I'd not cast an eye on any I would woo, father. I wear no yellow hoses yet, and even so, I would never marry without thy counsel and consent.
I hope I have raised some obedient children, though well I know that...
After rebuilding from the fire, his descendants continued to live in this small home, including another Thomas Plympton, who was the man whom the news that the British were coming to Concord was first brought. He was a brave soldier in the Revolutionary War, and was at Concord the day the fighting took place, April 19th, 1775. A British bullet pierced his clothing that day. As you can see, the Plymptons have a long and storied history in America, and much of it comes from this house. Coming up here on the house of Noah Webster. Noah Webster lived in this house located in New Haven, Connecticut with his wife Rebecca. He was living in this house when he published many of his works, including by far his most famous work, America's First Dictionary, titled American Dictionary of the English Language, which he published in 1828 at the age of 70. He wanted to capture distinctively American words and spellings for the first time. The house was built in 1823. From one man of words to another, now the house of the poet Robert Frost.
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
This house was built in 1835 and located in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
We would often read his poetry and reflect on the climate and the world in general. Listen to one such example as Robert Frost recites his poem, Logan, in which he examines choice, individuality, and regret.
Long I stood, looked down one as far as I could to where it ended the undergrowth. Then took the other.
This pretty colorful house was built in the early 1800s and located in Lancaster, Massachusetts. And this is where the famous plant breeder Luther Burbank was born and raised. This is the Hermitage slave quarters, built around 1820 near Savannah, Georgia. There were 52 of these small square brick homes on the Hermitage plantation, and they housed 201 slaves in 1850.
Agonizing passage on a slave ship. Here he fondly describes Africa, the land of his birth. That part of Africa known by the name of Guinea extends along the coast for about 3,400 miles and includes a variety of kingdoms. Of these, the most considerable is the Kingdom of Benin. Our land is uncommonly rich and fruitful and produces all kinds of vegetables in great abundance. We have plenty of Indian corn and vast quantities of cotton and tobacco. We have also spices of different kinds and a variety of delicious fruits which I have never seen.
This house is called the Sounds of America Gallery. It was built in 1830 in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania. When the house was bought and brought to Greenfield Village, it was thought to be the birthplace of Stephen Foster, who is the father of pop music, who wrote many popular songs in the 1800s that even popular artists of the 1900s used. It does come from the city and the right time period, but they were mistaken about him being born in it, So they made it kind of a celebration of American music. And here's a photo of the great Stephen Foster, without whom we wouldn't have a lot of the popular music of today. Next up is the Mattox family house. This house was built by a black former slave named Andrew Mattox. When Henry Ford bought it, the third generation of Andrew's descendants were living in it. Amos Mattox and his wife Grace were living here, raising their children in the Great Depression in the 1930s in rural Georgia. They had very little, and would fix the roof and other parts of the house with signs and whatever they could find. And they would use newspapers for the walls for insulation and decoration because they were cheap, and cardboard for the ceiling with no electricity and no running water. They owned only 2 sets of clothes. When Henry Ford bought the house from them to show their plight, he put them in a nicer house.
You know, and you're seeing it as it appeared about 1927, about some 60 years after the Civil War, but everything about it still reflects their struggle to get by. You know, they're being discriminated against, facing segregation. And they always have been since the Civil War. The big problem now is by the 20s it's institutionalized. Yeah. You know, you've got Jim Crow laws that basically enforce the fact that they have no rights. You know, they're not allowed to participate in society, politically, economically, socially. As a result, they have a farm, but they have nowhere to sell their goods. You know,
This is the Charles Steinmetz cabin that he used as a getaway and to study. He built it in the Mohawk Valley in upstate New York in 1896. He was regarded as the greatest electrical engineer of his day, and when his camp was struck by lightning, shattering a large mirror, it led to some of his greatest investigations into electricity. Some of his research while at the cabin helped him come up with ways to make alternating current practical and useful. George Matthew Adams grew up in this home, which was located in Saline, Michigan, and built in about 1840. Adams was a famous newspaper columnist in his day, with popular self-help columns called Today's Talk, published in newspapers across the country for more than 20 years, in the first half of the 1900s. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Dun-dun-dun-dun. The Adams family house. This house was built in 1934 out of logs from the McGuffey family property, from trees that were around when William Holmes McGuffey lived there. It was built in the style of the early 1800s schoolhouses on the frontier. Williams Home McGuffey was a college professor, best known for writing the McGuffey Readers, the first widely used series of elementary school level textbooks. Between 1836 and 1960, over 120 million of his books sold, which ranks them in the same category of sales popularity as the Bible and Webster's Dictionary. Now the Chapman family home here was built in 1860, right here in Dearborn, Michigan. John Chapman lived here with his wife Susie. John was Henry Ford's favorite teacher growing up. Chapman first taught at Scotch Settlement School, which is also here in Greenfield Village, you will see coming up. And then, when he moved to Miller School, the young Henry Ford followed him there as well.
Michigan was the home of John Brainerd Chapman, Henry Ford's favorite teacher. Chapman and his young wife Susie lived here during the 1870s, when Chapman taught at the Scotch Settlement School and later at Miller School.
This is a replica of the log cabin of famed scientist George Washington Carver, who is known for his work on uses for peanuts and other plants. Henry Ford had this replica of his cabin built in Greenfield Village in 1942 as a memorial to Carver and presented it to him at the time.
So there's the heating system.
This is another very cool piece of history preserved here at Greenfield Village. This is the actual Logan County Courthouse building, which was built in 1840 in Postville, Illinois, which has since been renamed Lincoln, Illinois. This is the exact courthouse that the great emancipator Abraham Lincoln practiced law as a young lawyer from 1840 to 1847, before he got into politics. He met a lot of people from his days as a lawyer, and it helped him later earn votes when he got into politics.
People wanted to be looked upon with respect, and they really were they were really concerned about personal conduct back then. There wasn't that freewheeling attitude that we have sort of acquired in more modern times, where people just do whatever they feel like doing, regardless of what the consequences are. Back then, consequences, that was a big thing. People were really, really concerned about, upholding certain values and so on. They didn't, they didn't look, sideways at someone else's wife or talk down to anyone or anything like that. That was a really, really big deal back then, for sure. I was just thinking about something when I was just walking in, and I heard Linda mention something. Not the slander. Oh, the vigilante groups in particular. I was thinking, yes, we don't want the Hatfield-McCoy situation to develop over a stolen pig, because that's what that blew around. And then, of course, led to multiple murders, virtually kidnappings at times, and everything else over the course.
And now, let's head over and listen to a couple of songs from the Greenfield Quartet, a classic-style barbershop group. And behind them is Scotch Settlement School, the school that a young Henry Ford attended and John Chapman taught at in the 1870s. And I'm not sure if that's cheating or not. Generally, I think barbershop quartets are supposed to sing without instruments. And I don't know if this counts as an instrument or a fifth member, but that goose is definitely trying to join.
Thank you. Our next song is what we call a polecat song. A polecat song is a song that every new barbershop member will learn so that they can perform with friends and strangers at any barbershop convention. This is Down Our Way.
Down our way, both night and day. You know everybody and they all know you. And even policemen say, how do you do? Pals by the score and gals galore, and that old gang of mine, we sang Sweet Adeline. Down our way, down our way, on a field blues, someday you'll long for me only, when no one else will do. Someday you're gonna feel weary, you'll grieve when I'm far away. Then you will be missing my hugging and my kissing. And remember what I say. You'll never know the good fellow I've been till I've gone away. You're bound to miss the little things that I did. I've done for you each day. You're gonna yearn for my return. You're bound to miss my good night kiss. You'll never know the good fellow I've been until I've gone away. You'll never know the good fellow I've been till I've gone away.
Wah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So he made a good point with those.
That'd be a good game.
Now, let's head into the Scotch Settlement School. The school was built in 1861, just 2 years before Henry Ford was born. Henry attended this one-room school from ages 7 to 10, with, as mentioned earlier, John Chapman being his favorite teacher.
Snow from the doorstep in the wintertime. In some schools, where there was a shortage of teaching materials, students were asked to share books or bring them from home. Books like the McGuffey Reader, Webster's Blueback Speller, were passed down from generation to generation.
Shut up, Goose. Well, that was rude.
Henry Ford knew from the beginning that he wanted a church and a town hall on the two ends of his village green. He wasn't able to acquire the historical buildings that he wanted, so he had this church built on one end and a town hall built on the other end in 1929. Ford named the chapel Mary Martha after his mother and his mother-in-law. The bell in the chapel was cast in the 1820s by Joseph Revere, using machinery and equipment he inherited from his father, Paul Revere. So that's pretty cool. Back at the front of Greenfield Village, we're coming up to a couple of the restaurants. First up is A Taste of History, which featured different stations of food inspired by historical figures from the past associated with Greenfield Village, such as George Washington Carver Station, featuring soups and salads inspired by his agricultural work. The Sarah Jordan Station features pies that were favorites of her boarding house guests from Edison's Menlo Park. There's a baked potato bar with all the fixings at the famed botanist Luther Burbank Station, and Mrs. Fisher Station serving fried chicken from her cookbook, and there are other stations as well. Now this white building is the Eagle Tavern restaurant. Here you can see their menu. This restaurant was built between 1831 and 1832. And it was located in Clinton, Michigan. Taverns like this were a popular place to eat, drink, and socialize with other patrons. There was also a sleeping quarters upstairs. Here at Greenfield Village, Eagle Tavern still serves food and drink from the mid-1800s recipes. This is a very cool restaurant that I was planning to eat at, but I hadn't realized they stopped serving at 3 o'clock, and I got there about 3:30 or 3:40. So that was disappointing, but they still let me look around inside. This is also the place that Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and his guests ate lunch at the Lights Golden Jubilee celebration, when they honored Thomas Edison and opened the museum. Henry Ford bought the building in 1927. Here is one more quick look at their menu.
Yeah, you were stuck in a coach for about 60 miles a day. You were sleeping together
together, you were eating together, so.
Let's take one more look back at the front of Eagle Tavern, a very cool relic of the past. And then on to another cool relic of the past, J.R. Jones General Store, the brown building straight ahead.
Eagle Tavern here.
All I know is me and that horse are starting a band.
Here comes Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus Lane. Vixen and Blixen, all his reindeers pulling on the reins. Bells are ringing, children singing, all is merry and bright.
Well, unfortunately, the band didn't work out. He wouldn't stop horsing around. So let's get a look at the front of J.R. Jones General Store. This building was built in 1857 and was located in Waterford, Michigan. They sold everything from basic food products to fabric, shoes, and farm tools. Similar stores could be seen in towns across the frontier. This store was also the first in town to have a telephone. They currently keep the store stocked with products looking how it would have looked in the year 1886.
I believe.
Wow.
But the time period with most of our artifacts are from is 1886.
So cool. This is the kind of stuff that would have been in the store, huh?
Mm-hmm. There are about 5,500 items in here, and around 3,000 of them are actually from the time.
Wow.
Most of the paper is reproduction, and the cans, because they exploded.
Don't want that. Where was the store from?
Waterford, Michigan. It's about 35 miles northwest of here.
That is definitely a relic of the past. And basically, you told the shopkeeper what you wanted and they got it for you, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Those little candies.
Mm-hmm. We'd wrap it up in that paper and tie it with a string, and we'd even offer to carry it out to your horse and buggy for you.
Gum, huh? Shoes over here.
We are at the other end of the greens, and you can see the town hall straight up ahead. I'm coming up to the Herschell-Spillman carousel. This carousel was built in 1913 and brought countless smiles to many happy people for years at Liberty Lake Park near Spokane, Washington. It was brought to Greenfield Village in 1974. And it does smell delicious around here. This beautiful building is the Sir John Bennett shop, originally located in a busy commercial area of London, England. Sir John Bennett was a third-generation clock, watch, and jewelry maker. His store was housed in this building from 1846 to 1929. Bennett had mythical figures Gog and Magog, as well as Father Time and Muse figure above the entrance, strike bells every 15 minutes to keep track of time. Henry Ford had a passion for clocks and watches his entire life, and when he found out the building was going to be demolished, he bought it and had it shipped to Dearborn. But to fit in with the scale of Greenfield Village, he had it brought from its original 5 stories down to 2 stories. It now houses a sweet shop in Greenfield Village. This is Firestone Farm. It includes a barn, farmhouse, and dairy that belonged to Benjamin and Catherine Firestone in the mid-1800s on 118 acres near Columbiana, Ohio. It's now on 7 acres in Greenfield Village and includes a chicken house, pig pen, apple orchard, field garden, peach and pear trees, pastures, and cropland. And this is Firestone Farmhouse, built in 1828. Benjamin and Catherine Firestone raised 3 sons here, including their son Harvey, who later founded the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company.
Let's cross the train tracks before the train comes.
And this here is the cider mill. In this area there are artists who make pottery, blown glass, and other handicrafts that are available for purchase. It's called Liberty Craftsworks. Henry Ford worked at this Edison Illuminating Company in Detroit in the 1890s. I was able to get the majority of highlights of Greenfield Village in this video series, but there are a few sites that unfortunately I just didn't have enough time to get in this video that I think are very cool also, such as the railroad turntable, Smith's Creek Depot, and the Owl Night Lunch Wagon. Henry Ford used to frequent the Owl Night Lunch Wagon when he worked the night shift as a steam engineer at Detroit's Edison Illuminating Company in the 1890s. After regular restaurants closed for the night, horses hauled lunch wagons such as this one out onto city streets. These were popular in the 1800s and offered simple and affordable food to evening workers, theater goers, police officers working the night shift, and anyone else that stayed out late. Henry Ford purchased the Owl Night Lunch Wagon in 1927 after Detroit banned these wagons from the streets because of traffic congestion. It still serves food to visitors to Greenfield Village to this day. I will leave you with a ride out on one of these early 1930s green buses. I cannot emphasize enough how cool this place is and how impressive this place is. If you are a history buff, do yourself a favor and come here. If you're not a history buff, do yourself a favor and come here anyway. You might just be one when you're done. If you haven't already seen part 1 of my Greenfield Village tour, I recommend checking that out. And check out the coming videos to see a ride in Greenfield Village in a Ford Model T car, and a ride around the village in an 1800s era train. Take care.
Orville wanted him to come here, huh?
This building is a 1/4 scale replica of Ford's first factory. They began assembling the first Model A of 1903. Who's gonna win, your dad or us? Think so? He's walking pretty fast.
He's trying, I think.
This is Henry Ford's birth home. He was born tomorrow in 1863, July 30th. Should I pass him?
Pass it. Pass it.